So thanks very much for having me. My talk title today, I can't take credit for the title actually, it was someone else's idea, but it does represent kind of what I want to talk about, in that the kind of nice version of this title would be, I guess, modern browser security features. And one of the biggest problems that I see when working with organizations is that often people just don't know about all of these acronyms. We do have these technologies to help us secure our websites, but people just don't know about them. So what I want to do today is kind of a high-level introduction to some of these technologies to tell you about them. We're not going to go into them too deeply, but what I want you to do is to go away and think, perhaps this could help me, perhaps we could deploy this on our site. And the technologies I'm going to talk about today, I see as kind of the evolution of how security has evolved on the web, So we have typical browsing scenario. We have the browser talking to us. So throughout the demo, we, or I, or us is the host, that's us. We're trying to protect our site. And historically, a lot of our effort was focused on kind of securing the server. So we patch our OS and our applications. We make sure that only the correct people have access to the servers. And there's lots of things that we can kind of do at this end of the conversation. And as time has gone by, our responsibility as the host has expanded out into the transport layer. I'm sure all of you heard of the Snowden revelations and the huge push to encryption, basically, as a result of that. And in fact, I published some research recently that shows that encryption is being adopted on the web now at a rate that we've never seen in history. So we are extending our responsibility kind of out into the transport layer, and we're now enforcing our security requirements there as well. And what we do with the technologies that I'm talking about today is we're actually going to take that one step further. And what we're doing is we're actually reaching out into the browser in an effort to secure this whole conversation end to end. And we can actually control certain features of the browser. We can configure options within the browser. And in some scenarios, we can actually override the user. If the user is doing something that would be dangerous, we can actually override that action and enforce our preferred action. So we're basically bringing the browser onto our team, and it's now going to be working alongside us to secure this entire conversation. Now, one of the things that usually happens when I talk about awesome new browser security features is that people kind of huff or roll their eyes and think, yeah, okay, you know, I bet browser support is terrible. But browser support isn't terrible. All of the features that I'm talking about here do have pretty mainstream support across the browsers. I'm sure I don't need to tell any of you that support is better at that end of the slide than this end. That's just a given. But in a lot of the scenarios, it doesn't actually matter. It doesn't matter if browser support isn't widely spread. You know, some of these technologies only have kind of like 50, 60% coverage in mainstream browsers right now. But it doesn't matter, because the browsers that support them will honor them, will do what they say, will act more securely. And the browsers that don't support them will just carry on as they do now. So we can deploy these things, and it's only going to get better with time as support gets better. And for one of them that I'm going to talk about, we can actually protect people that don't support it. So the first three acronyms that I want to talk about are what I refer to as a set of security headers. So I'm going to look specifically at the three down the left-hand side. We've got Content Security Policy. If you see me online, you'll know I'm a huge advocate of CSP. We've got Public Key Pins or Public Key Pinning, and then strict transport security. So these are the CSP, PKP, and STS acronyms from my slide title. There are some other security headers down the right-hand side. I'm going to make the slides available after my talk. So if you do want to have a look into some more of these, I've listed them up there as well, just so you can kind of go away and do additional research on them as well. But I'm going to start with something called Content Security Policy. And Content Security Policy was originally created to stop something called a content injection attack, or basically to stop bad people putting bad things into our websites. And this is an example of what a cross-site scripting attack might look like. We've got some HTML up there. It's one of our web pages, and we don't know how. It doesn't matter how, but an attacker's got a script tag into our page, and it's going to load a keylogger file into our page. This is a cross-site scripting attack, and this is basically one of the main things that CSP was created to try and fight, to try and mitigate. And CSP itself, like I said, is just a HTTP response header. So if you're familiar with HTTP requests and responses, you'll know what response headers are, and you can see Content Security Policy is there, just issued as another response header with the response. So this is all we need to do. As a host, to enable CSP protection, we just issue the CSP response header. There's no particularly technical configuration to do. We just issue the header and put the policy in that we want the browser to enforce. Now, building the policy itself can sometimes be a little bit tricky. It can be harder on legacy applications, but we have some things that can help us out. Now, the policy itself is built of one or more of what we call the CSP directives. And these basically are where we start to control the actions of the browsers. The ones that I'm showing on the screen at the minute are probably about a third of the directives that are available, and they're what I refer to as the fetch directives. These are the ones that control the actions of the browser when it's going out to fetch some kind of content to bring back and put into our pages. And they're fairly self-explanatory. So we have image source in the top right. That details and lists the locations the browser is permitted to load images from. We've got the font source. So you specify the font source directive and list the locations that the browser is allowed to load fonts from. So to show you what this looks like, I've put together pretty much the most basic CSP that I could kind of think of. So we issue the content security policy header. I put the default source in there. That was on the previous slide. Every directive on the previous slide falls back to default if it's not specified, so you can be a little bit more relaxed in your policy creation. And I've just said default source self, so that means that by default the browser can load content from my domain, that's what the self keyword does, and cdnjs.com. So I'm saying you are only permitted to load content from these two locations. Content is not allowed to be loaded from anywhere else. Going back to our evil.com JS keylogger we saw a few slides ago, evil.com is not in the whitelist, so the browser would not load that script. We've neutralized the cross-site scripting threat. The problem is that you wouldn't actually be able to deploy that on your site, because I'm sure all of you guys, like me, load content from about 1 million different locations and have all kinds of crap on your website, so we have to kind of fine-tune our policies. So I've taken that policy and I've just fine-tuned it a little bit. So by default, I've said I'm happy to load any content from myself, and what I'm doing now is I'm adding in the script source. So when you define a new policy directive like this, you override the default, so I've had to specify self again, so that I can load scripts from myself, and I've put in the Cloudflare and Google CDNs. And what that basically allows you to do is have script tags on your page like that. So the browser will go through rendering the page, it'll come across these script tags, and it'll check the hosts in the script tags against the script directive in the header. And if that host is in the header, then the browser will load the script. If it's not, then the browser will block the script and it will not load it. So that's for scripts. And you basically just kind of go on fine-tuning like this. So you can see here we've got the script source, style, where can we load styles from, image source, child source is for things like iframes. So if you embed like a YouTube video or something, they typically come in iframes. And you just kind of go through all of your content and whitelist the locations that you expect to load content from. And by whitelisting the locations that we do want to load content from, we can stop content from being loaded from locations that we don't want it to be loaded from. So this is like one of the first aspects of CSP. This is where the browser actually goes out to kind of fetch content and bring it back. But there are a lot more directives in CSP. As I said, I think the ones that I showed earlier are about a third. So I've kind of cherry-picked another few here. Again, we're not going to get full coverage in a talk like this. I need the full slot to talk about just CSP and probably more time. So I've cherry-picked these ones here because I quite like these. And I really like the form action directive. Now, the form action directive literally kind of does what it says on the tin again. It controls where the action for any form on your site is allowed to post to. And I don't know why every site on the planet isn't using this, because the one thing that we definitely don't want to happen on our website is for our login form to post somewhere else. When your users come to your website, they type in their username and password and they hit submit. Do you actually want that form to be able to send that username and password elsewhere? Hopefully the answer to that is no. I always want the username and password to come to me. And that's what the form action directive does. It says to the browser, these are the only locations that you're allowed to send form data. And CSP is issued on a per page basis. You issue it as a response header. So you could just lock this down on your login page if you have forms elsewhere that are supposed to post to third-party domains. We have the frame ancestors directive. Some of you may be familiar with the X-frame options header, which controls whether or not your site is allowed to be framed by other sites. So can somebody load my site in an iframe in their site? It's quite often used for things like clickjacking attacks. So if somebody on my site with frame ancestors, if somebody put this iframe into their page and tried to load my site in an iframe in their page, the browser would block it. And this is what frame ancestors controls. Who is allowed to frame you? And it's a lot more flexible than the XFO header, because the XFO header is an on-off setting. With CSP and frame ancestors, you can actually whitelist, maybe there are 3 websites that you're happy to frame you, and then no others. So you can have more flexibility. This effectively deprecates XFO, although not officially. It's both are still supported. And these two, I really like block all mixed content and upgrading secure requests. If you serve your site over HTTPS, I'm sure many of you know about something called mixed content. You have a HTTPS page, and it tries to load a HTTP asset. The browser will throw up some kind of warning. It will say there's mixed content on this page. It's a bad thing, and it results in a bad user experience. So on my HTTPS site, we're loading this asset. It's an image tag, and it's got a HTTP source. And you can use one of these 2 directives. The first one, block all mixed content, kind of does what it says on the tin. It will see this HTTP source, and it will block the image. It will say, that's mixed content, I'm just going to block it and not load it. What I prefer and what I use is the upgrading secure requests. So the browser will see this HTTP asset, but before it tries to load it, it will switch the scheme to HTTPS and fetch it over HTTPS instead. So we've avoided the mixed content warning. It can't happen now because the browser will default to secure. Now, we can't guarantee that image is available over HTTPS because this particular website might not have it, but at least we've tried to fix the problem rather than just blocking it or getting a mixed content warning in the browser. Now, one of the things that you may have kind of picked up on with the whole CSP thing is you do have the ability to kind of break your website. If you accidentally, miss out some sources in your JavaScript or your styles and you don't load your style sheets, your website's going to look pretty naff. So we have a way of testing CSP without any risk whatsoever. And what we do is we issue exactly the same policy, but we just change the name of the header and add report only to the end. So what this does, it sends it out to the browser, and it says to the browser, I want you to look at this policy, and it will pop errors in the dev console for any things that breach it, but without actually taking the blocking action on the page. So if you've accidentally wiped out all of your JavaScript or all of your styles, instead of actually blocking it and trashing your website, it'll just pop an error in the dev console. We'll look at these more closely later, don't worry about reading it. So it's a way of deploying it without the risk. So you can open up your website, deploy the CSP in report only mode, and fly around and have a look for any errors coming up in the dev console. Maybe you've missed something and you just need to make an addition to your whitelist, or it could be a genuine problem. The only problem with that is it doesn't really scale. I've worked with a couple of media organizations that have like 15,000 page back catalogs of, I won't swear, rubbish. And, this like flying around with the dev console open trying to find these errors is just not going to work. But CSP can fix that as well. We have something called CSP Reporting. So if you look at this header, we've got another directive in here on the second line called the Report URI directive. And what this does, it says to the browser, if you come across an error, what I would like you to do is send me a bug report to the address that I've specified. So you put report URI in. I run a service, funnily enough, called report URI, which is designed specifically to collect these reports. And if something violates the CSP, the browser will fire a post with a JSON payload that contains all the details of what went wrong. So you can see here I've got an example JSON payload. It gives you the document URI. Which page did this violation happen on? I want to know where it happened. What was violated? It was the script source in this particular case. It gives you the original policy because you can issue customized CSPs in different areas of your site with more or less protection. So it gives you the original policy back to know what you were working with. And the blocked URI here, evil.com. So I now know that on that particular page on my site, there is a script tag trying to load content from evil.com, and evil.com isn't in my whitelist. And again, if you look at the header here, it's still in report only mode. So you can use this before you actually enforce it to get feedback from your visitors. And you're basically taking all of your visitors' browsers and turning them into tiny little QA bots. So they're actually going to go and QA your website and file really nice bug reports. And John couldn't even get me to do that when I worked with him. So you're getting free QA. You can actually, turn your browsers, your visitors' browsers into little QA bots and actually get them to do the legwork for you. And there's a couple of kind of little tricks with CSP as well. You can issue multiple CSP headers, so you can layer your policy however you like. You can have like one huge big policy, or you can have multiple policies with different purposes. And there's one here. If anyone's ever been involved in a migration of taking a site from HTTP to HTTPS, you'll know that it can actually be a bit of a nightmare. Unfortunately, it's not just as easy as flipping the big encryption switch and turning it on. So one of the things that we want to avoid is mixed content that I touched on. And you can use this header here. So it's a report-only header. It's not going to take any blocking action. And the default source, what you can actually do is just specify the scheme like I have here. So I'm saying by default, I don't care where I load anything from. I just want it to be loaded over HTTPS. And then I specified the report URI directive. So if anything violates this policy, it's loaded over HTTP, the browser will send you that report that we just saw. So again, you're turning all of your visitors' browsers into little QA bots, and they're basically going to scan your entire website for you for free and file these little reports when they find things that violate your policy. So if you are going through a migration or you're looking at a migration, use things like this. It makes your life so much easier. Just get all your visitors' browsers to do the hard work. Don't sit there grepping through whatever to try and find HTTP image tags or things. Use CSP. And I want to touch on just a couple of the advanced features. As I said, I definitely don't have time to talk about CSP in as much detail as I like. But you can do things like whitelisting scripts with their hashes as well. If you don't want to whitelist the origin that they're being loaded from, you can just whitelist them using their hash. you can inject nonces into the script tag and into the CSP header. So you can whitelist script tags or any tag that you want with a nonce as well. CSP has a graceful fallback. We've got 3 different versions of the CSP spec now, and we can gracefully fall back all the way through all 3 of them. So if you want to use the latest and greatest features from CSP 3, it will gracefully fall back to browsers that are CSP 2 and 1 compliant without completely breaking them. So we don't need to worry about adding these new features into our policies, because if the browser doesn't understand it, it will just disregard it and carry on. So there's no worry about kind of supporting the older versions. Path whitelisting, Padge isn't here, but if I didn't mention path whitelisting, Padge would have a heart attack. Rather than whitelisting like an entire origin, like cdnjs.com, basically says, I can load any script from cdnjs.com. You can actually drill right down into the specific path. So if you're loading a particular version of Angular, you can actually whitelist the path to that specific version to make sure an attacker can't load in an older version or load in a different script from that host. So you can be really, really tight and really restrictive with your CSP if that's what you need. I touched on the multiple policies thing. Don't worry about having like one huge, massive, big policy. I see lots of sites trying to go for crazy, insane policy like on their first deployment. Just turn one feature of CSP on. Start out with just upgrading secure or just a set of pretty broad default sources. A lot of sites fail on deploying this because they try and do literally like crazy, insane policy from the beginning. Just go for the easy wins. Just cherry pick a couple of things, enable 1 or 2 features and build on it. And you can issue the enforced and report only header at the same time. So you can have your actual enforced policy, and then you can deploy another policy alongside in report only mode to say, right, I want this one enforcing, but I want to get the feedback on what would happen if I used this one instead. So you can kind of iterate through different policy versions as well. And there's something coming in CSP 3 yet. It's only supported in Chrome right now called Strict Dynamic. And basically, if you didn't want to whitelist all of the locations that you load script from, and you have a script tag on your page, you can whitelist that script, and with Strict Dynamic, you can permit it to bring its dependencies in without having to whitelist all of the origins of the dependencies. So it just makes CSP a little bit easier to deploy, because you say, I trust this script, and I want to pass that trust on to any dependencies that it may load, without having to whitelist all of their origins, or whitelisting them via hash, or whatever other method. So we've realized that CSP was a little bit difficult to deploy, and there are some things coming in the next version to make that easier. So the one last thing to wrap up on CSP as well, I'm sure a couple of you pen test guys probably picked up on, is with the cross-site scripting, we can whitelist the third-party origins like evil.com and block the script from loading there. The way that we get a complete kind of protection really against cross-site scripting is that inline scripts like this are also banned by CSP by default. So if you have a script tag, this one's not particularly malicious, but if you had this script tag on your page, the browser would just not execute it full stop. It's inline script. And the reason is the browser doesn't know where it came from. The browser can't know whether we as the host put that there or whether an attacker put it there. It's just an inline script tag. So what we have to do is externalize that file, externalize it into a file and then load it back from our domain, a domain, whatever. But we're giving the browser the piece of information that it needs. Is this host in the whitelist? You can enable inline script in CSP if you want, but it's one of the biggest wins that we have with CSP. So last resort, if you really have to, enable inline script, but try not to, because we lose a really good mitigation for cross-site scripting. So that was a very brief overview of CSP. The next acronym up was PKP, which is public keypinning. This is another HTTP response header still. And PKP kind of, it helps us with the ability to combat something called rogue certificates. So I've got 2 certificates up on the screen here. They're both issued from my domain. They're both signed by a legitimate certificate authority, and they're both within the validity period. Would the browser accept either one of these certificates? Does anyone disagree? But what if this one wasn't issued to me? What if this one was issued to somebody else? The browser is still going to trust it, because the only 3 metrics that a browser has to look at in a certificate is the host name correct, which it is it signed by a trusted CA, which it is, and is it within its validity period? So it's past those 3 metrics, even though the certificate isn't mine. It's a rogue certificate. Somebody might have compromised the CA. Start.com got popped a few weeks back. The guy tried to get certificates for PayPal.com. The browser doesn't know. So what PKP does is PKP gives the browser a 4th metric by which to check the certificate. And again, PKP is just a HTTP response header. You can see there the public keypins header, and you issue the policy as the value of the header and send that out with all of your pages. Now, fortunately, PKP is a bit simpler than CSP. These are the directives in PKP, so it's nice and simple. We've only got the 3. We've got the pin SHA-256 there, which is the actual pin of the key that we want to pin. Max age is the number of seconds that the browser should cache it for. So unlike CSP, which is enforced on a per page basis, it has no lifetime other than the lifetime of the page. PKP is actually cached by the browser for the number of seconds in max age. And include subdomains, again, it's pretty obvious. If you issue this on a host, do you want to include all subdomains underneath that particular host or not? And this is what a PKP policy looks like. So it's kind of looks a little bit messy, but it's basically just we've got the two pin SHA-256 values. So these are the actual two pins, these two keys that we want to pin. One is what I refer to as the live pin, so that's the current pin that you have in production for the key that you're actually using. And the other is the backup, so it's a key in a safe somewhere that if your main key ever gets compromised, you can fall to the backup and then get your backup out of the safe and carry on using that and then roll your header. So you've got to have a minimum of two. But if you're looking at PKP, the minimum is two. It's not the maximum. People go with PKP and only have one backup. Look at mine. I have like 6 backups. You can have as many backups as you want, and you can issue as many of these as you want. So don't feel that you kind of have to stick to the spec and just go with the 2. And then you can see include subdomains and the max age there. I think that's like a month or something in seconds. And the actual pin values themselves. The pin value itself is the base 64 encoded version of the SHA-256 hash of something that we call the subject public key information. Basically, just think of it as a hash of your key. It's, we don't need to know the specific details, but basically we're just hashing the SPKI, base 64 encoding it, and then sticking that in the header. So don't worry too much about the technicalities. The other consideration if you want to deploy PKP is where you're going to pin, because when we use certificates on our websites, we actually have a certificate chain. So I've rebuilt my chain here to show you. You've got my domain over on the right-hand side. That's signed by the Let's Encrypt Intermediate certificate, who are cross-signed by the DST root. And what you can actually do is you can pin at different levels. You can pin your leaf, like we call it the leaf, which is the one over here with my domain name on, or you can pin further down the chain, like the intermediate, or at the root. Now, there are different considerations. There's pros and cons to each of these. If you want to pin at the leaf, you're pinning your own private key, or your own public key, your own key pair. So you're responsible for looking after the associated private key. And the backup is offline, hopefully somewhere in a safe on a USB drive that nobody can get access to. So what you're saying to the browser is, this is the key that I'm currently using in my certificates, and I have this one backup. So it should either be one of these 2 keys. Whenever you come to my website, we should be using one of these 2 keys. Now, this is the most secure level to pin at because only you have these keys. Nobody else has these keys, so nobody can get any rogue certificates for your site because the browser is going to look for one of these 2 keys. The problem is that if you kind of get compromised and someone gets access to your key and you've not looked after your backup or you've lost it and you have no backup, you're kind of screwed because your website is going to go offline for however long you set in max age. So what some websites do is they pin further down the chain. And you can pin at the intermediate. So you could, in my scenario, I could pin against the Let's Encrypt intermediate. And then for your backup, because you have to pin another key that's not in the chain, you could pin against another CA. So you could pick 2 CAs that you trust. You say, here's my current CA. So this key should always be in the chain. And here's my backup key, which is another CA that I trust. Now, the problem with pinning here is that now these 2 CAs can technically issue rogue certificates for you because we're trusting the intermediate. But what we have done, it's still a massive win because we've gone from the 350 CAs in the world, or however many there are, that could issue rogue certificates for us, down to just these 2. So we've hugely reduced the attack surface now, in that you can pick 2 reputable CAs that might not be coerced by foreign governments, things like that, and lock your PKP against those. So if somebody pops the China Post Office and gets them to issue a certificate for my domain, then the browser won't accept it because it knows that these are the only 2 CAs that I trust to issue certificates for me. The only problem with intermediates is that they're not really long-term. Like, you can't guarantee that they'll be there for a long time. Let's Encrypt shifted from the X1 to the X3 intermediate recently, broke a few things. So intermediates can be kind of a little bit dynamic. So what you can do is pin against the root, because roots are much more long-term. It takes organizations literally years to get their roots into the root store. So pinning against the root is a little bit more reliable in that you know that the root's not going to go anywhere. So I could pin against the DST root, which is where Let's Encrypt chain down to, and then just pick another root certificate to pin against if you want. And this is actually, if you look at GitHub's website, this is what GitHub do. GitHub pin, I think it's DigiCert and VeriSign. So they pick 2 reputable CAs that they trust, and they've pinned against them and said, these are the only 2 CAs on the planet that should ever issue certificates for github.com. If you see a certificate from another authority, it's rogue, it's not ours, don't trust it. So they can stop their users basically be man in the middle if somebody manages to get hold of a trusted root cert, like a company that recently got cross-signed by Symantec. And one of the other good things with PKP is, again, we have PKP reporting. And the other one as well, you'll see that I've added report only onto the header here. So again, you can deploy this in report only mode. And if you think, oh, I don't know if I'm going to turn this on and tank my website, just turn it on in report only mode. And if you get boatloads of errors coming in, then you broke something. But nothing's going to happen. There's nothing worse than the fact that you're going to get a lot of error reports. So deploy it in report only mode and enable reporting. And the good thing with the reporting is that if somebody does actually get a rogue certificate signed for your site, the browser will post a JSON payload and they actually put the PEM encoded certificate chain in the payload. So you can actually see who's issued it and go directly to the CA as soon as it happens and say, you've just signed a certificate for my domain. This needs to be revoked. So you can actually know about these things that are happening in the wild, rather than the current situation, which is that everybody's browsers would just carry on accepting the certificate. So that's, PKP is probably one of the most complex of the technologies that I'm talking about today. I recently did a crawl of the top 1 million sites on the planet, and there's about 200 that use PKP. It's literally a brand new specification, and a lot of people are scared of what we call the HPKP foot gun or HPKP suicide, which is where you basically get your pins wrong, and then the browser can't use anything. So deploy it in report only mode. Don't just turn these things on. Always take the safe approach. Next up is something called strict transport security. Now, without strict transport security, we're going to look through a basic conversation with twitter.com. So a user opens up their browser, and like most of you guys, I'm pretty sure that you just type in twitter.com, like I do. So that's the blue bit in this request here. The user opens a browser, types in twitter.com. The browser defaults to HTTP. So the very first thing that the browser wants to do is to send an insecure request to twitter.com. So it sends the GET request to HTTP, twitter.com, and Twitter responds back with a 301 redirect and says, I don't want to talk HTTP, I want to talk HTTPS. I want to be secure, so please come back over a secure connection. And then the browser honors that request and reissues the same request over HTTPS. Now the only problem is that the very first request that went out and the redirect that came back that told us to go to a secure protocol was sent over an insecure protocol. So we said, hey, we need to secure our conversation, but we did it over an insecure protocol. So an attacker's just going to throw that away because we're talking HTTP. And the problem with that, I'm sure some of you have heard of SSL strip or SSL stripping attacks, is that the attacker then jumps into the middle, and when they see the redirect coming back that says go HTTPS, they just throw that away. The attacker will go back HTTPS and fetch the page, and then answer the client's initial request over HTTP. So the attacker literally sits in the middle, talks HTTPS to Twitter. They're happy because we're talking HTTPS. And my browser never got the redirect, so my browser's happy to keep talking HTTP. And then the attacker literally just sits in the middle and gets our entire conversation with twitter.com. Now, STS fixes this. And again, STS is just another HTTP response header that you pop into responses on your site. So a strict transport security header and the policy. And again, I like STS because it's not that complicated. We only have 3 directives that we can use. The only actually required directive for a valid STS policy is max age. So we have the max age, which is again the number of seconds that the browser should cache and apply this policy for. Includes subdomains, does what it says on the TIM. And I will touch on preloading later, but there is one more directive. But the only required one is max age. So a valid STS policy can be as simple as that. This is how long we want to apply STS for. And what STS does, once the browser receives this, is STS says, never talk HTTP to me again. Only ever talk to me over HTTPS. So that's the sole purpose of STS. There's a couple of other benefits, but this is basically what we want from STS. And what happens then, once the browser has received this strict transport security policy, is that you open up your browser, you type in twitter.com, exactly the same, and the browser wants to default to HTTP. But with STS, it won't. The browser will actually block that request. Now, even if the user types in http://twitter.com, if they click on a link or a bookmark or anything, it doesn't matter. If the user tries to speak HTTP, the browser will override them and block their action because it knows we've issued an STS policy, we only want to speak HTTPS. So it will actually override any action whatsoever and force the request, the very first request, to go out over HTTPS instead. And what we've done there is basically ensure that our entire communication happens over HTTPS and sliced out the whole HTTP part, which is where an attacker would have inserted themselves. So if you're using HTTPS on your website and you redirect to HTTPS, then you should be using STS. because it will get rid of that initial redirect, which will just save you guys load because you're not constantly just redirecting browsers pointlessly. But it also removes all these SSL stripping attacks. The other thing that STS does as well is, has anyone ever got a certificate warning in their browser? I'm sure loads of you have. You go to a website and it says, oh, there's something wrong. And there's a nice big shiny blue continue button at the bottom. And like 99.9% of people are like, oh, my browser's telling me something, meh. And they just mash the button to bypass the warning and carry on. STS disables that. It completely takes those options out. If you get any error to do with the HTTPS connection and you're an STS host, the browser is not permitted to allow the user to bypass that. So that's the other benefit of STS, is that people can't just click through those warnings like they always do. Now the next acronym that I want to talk about is something called SRI, or Sub-Resource Integrity. You'll be really happy to know that SRI isn't a HTTP response header. And what SRI does is it resolves the problem that we have with third-party trust on our sites. I mentioned earlier about the CSP policy being too basic because we all load content from countless domains, from CDNs, we have Twitter widgets, we embed things, we have all kinds of stuff loaded into our website. So my site's here, nice and secure. I'm loading in jQuery, whatever, from some CDN. I'm effectively giving that CDN code execution in my page. It's basically, I call it, I saw it online somewhere, consensual XSS. So it's saying to this CDN, hey, give us a JavaScript file and just like plop it in my page. And you're trusting that CDN to give you the JavaScript file that you actually wanted. Now, most of the time, they will give you the JavaScript file that you actually wanted. They'll just give you jQuery or whatever it is that you're loading. But what if the CDN's compromised? What if someone at the CDN has a bad day and thinks, you know, screw all you guys, I'm going to put lolcats into jQuery and, you know, completely tank everyone's website. We're trusting them to do that. And what SRI does is it removes this trust aspect. So you can see here, basic script tag, we're loading jQuery from somecdn.com, and SRI is basically just two extra attributes in a script tag. We have the first one here that's cross-origin. Its value is always anonymous, don't worry about that, just set and forget. And then we have the integrity attribute as well. And this is basically just the base64 encoded hash of the file that we should expect from the CDN. So what we're saying to the browser is, we want to load jQuery from this CDN, here's the hash of the file that you should get from the CDN. So when the CDN sends that file, the browser will hash it and compare the hash to the integrity attribute. And as long as it finds a hash that matches, we know that the CDN hasn't tampered with the file itself. We've actually got the file that we were expecting to get. Now the good thing with SRI is it's set and forget. You know, if you're loading a particular version of jQuery from a CDN, that file should never change. So we don't need to change these. Once you put that script tag into the page, you just put that script tag into the page, and the only time you ever need to do anything with it is if you want to change the jQuery version. You just update the hashes. So SRI is minimal overhead, and it gives us a lot of security because we can take, we're still trusting the CDNs to load those assets, but we're verifying the files that they're sending to us, and that's the crucial part. It's like trust, but verify as well. Dead easy to set up. If you want to do it kind of at the command line, literally just cut out the file, pipe it into, I'm using OpenSSL Digest, SHA-256, don't forget the binary flag, spent ages debugging this, and then just pipe it into some kind of base64 encoding. And that output there is what you put into the script tag, prepended with SHA-256 in this case. And if you want to do SHA-384, and you can also do SHA-512. And you can put all three versions into the script tag for the same file, and the browser will always choose the strongest hash that it supports. So again, old rubbish browsers, we can keep the SHA-256 hash for them there, but if you're using a newer, better browser, it will pick the stronger hash to validate the file against. I also have one of my websites online where if you don't want to do all this, you can literally just paste in the URL for the asset, and it just generates the full script tag with all of the values in for you. So you don't even have to do this. You could build it into your build pipeline, so you can automatically generate these hashes of files into deployments and things. There's loads of different ways to do this. And it can look a bit messy. That's kind of, that's the script tag there. It's only got the SHA-256 and 384 values in. I couldn't fit the 512 one on as well. So it does make the script tags a little bit bigger, but that's it. That's SRI fully deployed. I've got away, fetched that jQuery file, generated the hashes and put them in the script tag. Done. Takes about 10 seconds, and there's no maintenance from that point forwards, as long as you're referencing a particular version of jQuery, and you don't want your CDN to be changing code versions and things anyway, because that's potentially a terrible idea. So back to the original third-party trust problem now, I have my nice, super secure website, and the content will be blocked. It will get the file, it will get jQuery from the CDN, maybe they've switched it out to be a keylogger or rickroll, whatever. It will hash the file, and it will say, this file doesn't match the hash I was expecting. This is not the file that I wanted. And it will just throw it away. Now, there is also the ability to have kind of a fallback mechanism, if you will. It was in the specification, so if you load this file from the CDN and something happens, the hash doesn't match, there was another attribute where you could specify a fallback location somewhere on your own site, perhaps. That didn't make it through, but what I saw, there was a talk at DEF CON, and a couple of guys have basically written a tiny little script that will look for the events of scripts being blocked with SRI, and then you can just load in your own local version. So it will say, right, load it from the CDN, something went wrong, okay, load jQuery from my domain instead as a backup. So you can have a fallback as well with SRI. If the CDN, does do something bad and changes the file, then you can also have a backup option and not have to worry about your website going offline, which is something that a lot of people worry about, but when you think about it, if the CDN's changed the file, then we probably don't want to be carrying on anyway. So what I want to do now, I want to demo quite a few of these. I was thinking of doing it throughout, but I didn't want to keep tabbing in and out of the slides. So I actually want to demo a few of these things, excuse me, up and running now. My Twitter handle is there. I'm going to send out a couple of tweets with links in for you to click. I would like some of you guys to click on them because some of them play music, so make sure your device has sound on. And we can actually see some of these things in action. Excuse me. Is that mirrored? Oh, it's gone off, yep. So the first one that I want to have a look at is going back to CSP here. And I want to look at a basic content injection attack. So I'm just copying a piece of JavaScript there, nothing particular. And you know what, let's actually, I wonder if the demo gods will be nice. Does anyone here work for Barclays? No? Good. I'm going to use the Barclays website as an example then. I had to change this when I did this last time because someone put their hand up. Awkward. And I'm basically, right, so I'm going to go to the console. Wow, that is a load of rubbish. So ignore all those errors. I don't know what's wrong with their website. So basically, the piece of JavaScript that I've just copied, what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste it into the console and allow it to run. So I'm going to paste it in, hit enter, and I'll close the console so you can watch what this piece of JavaScript does. So paste the script in, hit enter. And you can now make this website do the Harlem Shake. So when it actually kicks in, it just grabs all the elements on the page and does crazy shit with them. So this is basically a content injection attack. That's really annoying. Let me just get rid of that. Who here thinks that that's actually indicative of any kind of problem? Yeah? Okay. Does anyone think that that's not a problem because I just did it in my browser and meh? Okay, that's a good response. So what I've done there is I've injected the content locally. So obviously that's only affected my copy of the page in my browser. It's not happened to anyone else's, copies of the page in their browsers. No one else will see that but me. So, but what it does indicate is the fact that if you can get the content there, then the browser will honor it. It will do what it says. If it says play an annoying song and make all the things bounce around, then the browser will do it. And all you have to do is get that content there. Now, I can't do the rest of the demo on the Barclays website because I get in a lot of trouble. So fortunately, Troy, if you don't follow Troy Hunt, he's another security researcher down in Oz. He set up this website, which is basically a playground where you can actually do hacky things and he gives you permission. So what I'm going to try and do is get that content into the page, but without actually doing it myself to actually get it in there. And what I'm going to use for the first example is something called a reflected cross-site scripting attack. So by reflected content, I mean, if I give this website the string BSides and then hit submit, the website sends me the page back and it's reflected that content into several locations. You can see it's been rendered back into the search box there. It's been rendered into the page and it's also in the address. So I give it a piece of content and the page comes back with the content in it. Now what if I give it a script tag? If I give this search box a script tag and say, hey, here's a script tag. I'm not going to type it all in. Here's one I prepared earlier. So basically, this does exactly the same thing. I've just put the search term into the URL instead. And what I've done is I've put some script into the search term. So the browser has sent that off to the site, and the site has sent the page back and written the script that I gave it into the page. And you can see now that we've popped an alert. It's pretty harmless, but this is a reflected cross-site scripting attack. So now, what I can do next is, if I take my Harlem Shake script and pass that in, instead, I can now make this website do the Harlem Shake. And to prove this is actually real, I will send out a tweet now, and I want to hear someone's I want to hear someone's device playing this. You can click it, it's fine. Nothing bad will happen. Just click the link. So that's a reflected cross-site scripting attack, and this is basically just a specially crafted URL. And like someone click on it, I want to actually hear it do the thing. You click on that URL, and then it will render that script tag into the page, and your copy of the page on your phone will start playing the annoying music and doing all the crazy bouncy around things. There we go. So it definitely works. And this is okay, but I need to get you to actually click on this specially crafted link. That link has got the payload in it. That's reflected. What we want and what's better is a stored cross-site scripting attack, and we can do this as well. So on this website, you have the ability to look at various different cars. And, oh, sorry, it's logged me out for some reason. What did I set my password as? Password? No. Why does it log me out? Okay, I'll just create a new fake one. Sorry about that. For some reason Troy may have reset the website. Every now and again somebody just completely deletes like his entire site. So he has to reload it from an image, which means I lose my account sometimes. So you can go onto the leaderboard here. Oh, this is the other problem with using a hacky website. So you can go into the leaderboard here and view information about a particular car, but what you can also do is you can cast a vote, and when you vote, it puts your name down here, and it also puts a comment at the bottom. So I'm going to vote on one of these cars and leave a comment. Nothing to see here, ... And what I'm going to do, I have a script tag here as well. I'm going to copy that script tag, append that onto the end of my comment, and I'm going to vote. So what it will now do is it will leave my comment on the bottom of that page. Now my comment is there, but the browser has also rendered that script tag into the page, and it's now actually stored in the page. This is a persistent issue. So what happens now, if I revisit that page, somebody else's cross-site scripting payload pops up, and that script tag is now actually in that page permanently. So there's no special or crafted URL here, and I'll tweet this one out again. Another one. You can see it's not a crafted URL, there's nothing in the URL at all, it's literally just that page, and that page now actually has that payload embedded into it. So again, if you click on that link now in your browsers, it will do that permanently until somebody goes and actually deletes that. We will get the Harlem Shake popping up in the background every time. And again, the problem here is that the browser is rendering this content into the page, and it's saying, go and fetch this particular style sheet that does all the crazy animations, go and fetch this audio clip. And the browser doesn't know that it's not supposed to do that, because we've put the script tag into the page, and the browser doesn't know. And this is what we can fix with CSP. So going right back to the very first example, when I grabbed the script there, I'm going to go to one of the sites that I run. So this is the site report UI that I mentioned. I run this, I deploy CSP on here. And what I'm going to do is the very first thing that I demoed to you, open the console, paste the script in, and I'm going to hit enter. So it should start doing the crazy shaky things because I put the script into the browser. But it doesn't. And let me just zoom in so you can actually see a bit better. So it says here, there's some errors in the console now, and it says refuse to load the style sheet from blah, blah, blah domain because it violates the following content security policy directive, style source. And then there's another one down here, refuse to load the media because it violates the content security policy. So now, even though we've actually managed to get this script into the page that loads a style sheet and loads a media object, the browser knows, because of the content security policy, that I'm not supposed to be loading things from AmazonAWS.com because I don't load any content from there. So you can completely neutralize that attack with content security policy. One of the other things that I touched on as well was the form action. I really like the form action in CSP, and honestly, I just think that everybody... Oh, what? Are you hacking me while I'm on stage? So I'm going to go to the login page, and I'm going to have a look at my login form. Now, my login form posts, as you would expect, back to me, posts to my auth endpoint to the login controller. What I'm going to do, oh, actually, I'll just demonstrate that this works first. So I have 1Password on my laptop. I use the password manager. You all should. Let me just unlock that. So I have a keyboard shortcut for 1Password. I basically press Command /. I have multiple accounts for this website. It says, which account do you want to log in with? I hit scotthelme@hotmail.com. and it automatically fills in the username and password and hits login for me. So the one password literally just pastes my username and password into the box and says login with this username and password, right? That's how it's supposed to work. But what happens if that login form wasn't sending that back to me? Maybe, like I say, an employee had a bad day, someone logged into, maybe you use WordPress and you're terrible, logs into your CMS and changes the form. There's a lot of different ways that this could be changed. It doesn't matter how it's changed. What we want is to know that it's secure if it's not. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just change, the action here. Let's go to, steal password.php. So does everyone agree when I hit submit on this form that the browser will actually post to evil.com? Does anyone disagree? I've changed the page. It says post to evil.com, so that's what the browser's going to do. So it doesn't matter where this change happens. I know that I've just done this locally, but it doesn't matter where this change happens. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to hit command /, pop up my password manager, and I'm going to say login with this username and password. Except this time it's not worked, and you may have noticed a little error popped up in the console over here. Let's zoom in so you can see that. And it says that the browser refused to send form data to evil.com because it violates, following CSP directive, form action self. So my form action says the only time you ever send any form data is to me, or don't send it. So in this scenario, again, it doesn't matter who or how or why that form got changed. You know that the browser will not post your user credentials to evil.com. And hopefully nobody here wants their user credentials to ever be posted to evil.com. So that's one of the additional things that you can do with CSP as well. I set up, I think it was on this URL here. So just to quickly show you what SRI looks like. So I set up this page on my site the other day just to quickly demo this. I basically have two script tags on the page. One's got a valid hash for the file from the CDN, as you would expect. The other one has an intentionally invalid file hash. And quite simply, all the browser does when you load the page is it throws an error in the dev console, and it says, failed to find a valid digest for this particular resource being loaded from the CDN, and it tells you what the hash was, and it says, does it say over there? The resource has been blocked. So we got the script back from the CDN. In this case, I've obviously intentionally misconfigured the hash attribute for it, but it knows, the browser knows that something was wrong. This file is not the file that we were expecting, so it simply blocks it. And as I said, SRI is just set and forget. If you're putting a script tag or a style sheet into a page, just put the SRI attributes on them. Am I okay for time? Can I? Yeah?
The other track is just finishing, so...
Oh, okay. Oh, well, they're going to miss out.
I'm going to do my best sheepdog.
They're going to miss out on the... I have another one here as well. So what I'll do... I need to reload that page because that's going to evil.com. I just want to show CSP reporting. I mentioned with CSP reporting, when things violate your policy, the browser will fire that post object, the JSON payload to you. That actually happens in real time as well. And this is the other thing I like about CSP, is that someone successfully finds a cross-site scripting exploit on your website, you will literally get, like the first time it's exploited, you will literally get a post back that says something just went wrong on this page. So you actually get basically kind of real-time threat detection almost for free with CSP. And this service that I run basically just listens for these reports and it catches them in, parses them, does pretty graphs and things. But this particular page here, yeah, it looks all right, okay. And this page on my site basically has intentional violations. So I put things on here that breach my CSP on purpose to force the browser to send. So if I reload this page, once that's reloaded, the browser will send the reports, as you can see in the console. If I tab back over, like before I can even get back to the other tab, the browser's already fired the post payload with the reporting that says here. So you can see I've just loaded that page, CSP test. There's an image. I'm intentionally trying to load it with the FTP protocol, which I don't whitelist. So literally in the time that it took me to shift from one tab to the other, the browser's already fired the payload, we've already received it, parsed it, and you know there's a problem on your website in the time that it took me to click from one tab to the other. So you can literally get real-time feedback from your content security policy when it's deployed in the wild. And this, the reason I set up Report Your Eye and I run it is because CSP reporting is incredibly powerful. I've found so many problems on websites where we've deployed reporting for them. And if you need to sell it to the business, you can like make pretty graphs and things and make it look awesome. But from a technical standpoint, CSP reporting is so valuable. You can literally get real-time feedback from your visitors' browsers about what's going on your site in the wild. And the last thing So let me go back. Just to show you literally how easy it can be to generate an SRI tag. I have some tools. There's loads of tools online. Don't feel obliged to use mine. But you literally just paste in that asset there. You can incorporate this into, like your production environments. And it literally just spits out the script tag at the bottom. You could just write your own little script that does this, scan through your code base, pull out the script tags, and just put them back with the SRI attributes in there. So, there was, just out of interest actually, I'm just going to tweet this one as well. So let's see, live. If you click on that one for me, hopefully what we'll be able to see, I didn't think about this one actually, just so I can show you that it's definitely not faked. If someone finds that tweet and clicks on that now, hopefully we should see your actual live reports coming in, just to show you that it's not a setup and it definitely works. Oh, there we go. What browser are you using? Oh, it doesn't know. I'm on Chrome. Oh, I wonder what browser that is. Is anyone using a weird browser that's not Chrome, Firefox, Safari, or IE? Oh, okay. That'll be why. I'll have to look up your user agent later and add it. But yeah, that's basically it. If that was an actual cross-site scripting bug that was being exploited and people were actually being attacked by that, then that would contain all the information of the cross-site scripting bug. Obviously it's just useless image reports on this one, but this is the thing. You can actually sit there and monitor this and know real time when something goes sideways on your website. I'll leave the demos there actually, and that's pretty much everything from me. I'm hoping that you at least got enough information from these different technologies that you might be able to go away and think, can I deploy these, can I use them? More often than not, I find that people just don't know about them. They're not publicized widely. So this was meant as kind of an introduction, hopefully to get some thoughts going, and maybe that you can deploy some of these things like SRI, easy wins. There's a couple of features in CSP. Just go for the low-hanging fruit. Don't go for like crazy insane policies. Just go for the low-hanging fruit, and that's better than where we are at the minute. Thank you very much.